Hi, welcome to the ninth episode of the Javid Podcast. Today, my guest is Andrew Steen. Andrew is a former U.S. Army Ranger, a graduate of Vanderbilt University with a mathematics degree, and is currently pursuing a joint JD MBA program at Harvard. He also has entrepreneurial interests, with his main focus right now being his startup, Laptis, a company that streamlines access to substance use treatment. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This should be a good time. Looking forward to it.
Definitely. Honestly, I just gotta say, like looking at your profile, I don't know if you know him, you probably do. You remind me of Navy SEAL Johnny Kim, who, became like a Navy SEAL, studied mathematics, went to Harvard, became an astronaut. I'm really impressed how much you managed to fit and achieve in such a short period of time. It's very impressive. We'll delve into that more later, but I kind of gave you an introduction, brief words, but do you want to add anything to that? Do you want to say anything in your own words?
Yeah, no, I think you covered it well. I appreciate the analogy. Some parts of it I appreciate more or less than others. Yeah, no, it's great to be here. I think I would just say that like I feel a lot. Everything you said about me, I feel a lot of like gratitude for being able to have said about me, and it's not something that I try to like get in my head a lot, so to speak. So just really happy to be here and trying to keep chugging along. So
That's great. Well, yeah. Again, thank you and welcome. So let's, I guess, start with the first question, right? If you don't mind. Let's start with your educational background. So you went to Vanderbilt and pursued a major in mathematics. How was your, undergrad experience, and why did you choose math and not other major?
Yeah. First off, I love Vanderbilt. I thought Vanderbilt was one of the best experiences I've had in my life. The school does such an amazing job of balancing between an academically rigorous environment, but also providing, tons of opportunities outside the classroom to challenge yourself, to learn, to grow, and all that. And obviously it doesn't hurt that Nashville, it's right in Nashville. So it was just an awesome time. I went to Vanderbilt having honestly like no idea what I wanted to do with my life, not even a major or a career or anything. And so I remember my first semester there, I basically like ran into some kids like walking around in army uniforms. I was like, that's weird. Talked to them, kind of figured out, because I'm originally from Chicago. So the military isn't as, big up there as it is in kind of other parts of the country. Yeah, talked to these people in military uniforms, learned what ROTC was and said, that sounds kind of cool. And then I kind of showed up and joined it. And, the rest is didn't really look back. But anyway, so I say all that to say like mathematics was something I came across because I feel like math is a very broad discipline, especially because I took like the theoretical math major, like the Bachelor of Arts. And so I felt like because I didn't really know what I wanted to do later in life, I felt like math was kind of upstream of a lot of different things you could encounter. And kind of the discipline of math and the rigorous thinking has served me in so many different ways and really challenged me. I think made me a lot tighter of a thinker. And so I guess maybe it was like a hedge on my future in some way, but also it was really challenging, honestly. And I'm glad I did it. And I would just, encourage anyone who's kind of a little bit less certain about what they want to do to pursue a STEM degree just because of, kind of even just the indirect effects of how it teaches you to think.
I see. So that's fair, very fair. And, you mentioned Army thing, so we're going to spend a significant time on that. So you joined Army right after school and actually ended up being a member of a very elite special operations unit, the 75th Ranger Regiment. So I guess I have a few questions about that, right? Why right after school and why Army in general?
Yeah. So right after school was more of a product of joining ROTC. That was kind of part of the agreement. And I really wanted to, like, once I joined ROTC, I figured out what the Army was all about and, what the opportunities were after graduation. And it really excited me and interested me. And so it wasn't really something I wanted to wait for. Like, if anything, it was harder to wait to graduate than to like, to the other way around, like delay it a couple years on the back end. The reason why the Army, I wish it was a more careful answer than honestly, I just like the Army was the biggest branch. It had the most opportunities for different things later on. And, as far as kind of the, like the operational environment, if we're talking about deployments to, more active zones of the world, really mostly in the Middle East. The Army had a lot of those and was pretty heavily involved there. And so it felt like if I was going to be joining the military, I wanted to be, going to like the full extent of the opportunities available there. And so that was a big reason. Honestly, so it was just like the sheer size of it
Mm.
and the breadth of opportunity and stuff like that.
I see. I see. And, there are a few special operations, and all of them are, have played a huge significant role in military history, U.S. military history in their own ways. And usually the ones we hear about the most, kind of the poster boys are the Navy SEALs because of the movies, the podcasts, and just a bunch of like, I don't know, for example, Jocko Willink is one of the people that really come to my mind whenever I think of Navy SEALs, right? There's a lot of exposure, and a lot of people are drawn to that. I had buddies in college who wanted to become Navy SEALs just because of that. So I guess what drew you to the Ranger Regiment?
Yeah, I really liked, and maybe this will sound counterintuitive to some people. I really liked the fact that it wasn't as well known to the kind
Mm.
of the moviegoer, so to speak. I felt like that was that signified to me that there was a humility in that organization and that there was like this sense of professionalism and kind of dedication to a greater purpose rather than necessarily just fame or whatever else that was there. And I think that had tons of positive benefits in the day to day. And I'm happy to talk about those later. And just as like a more practical matter, the Ranger Regiment was, when I was there, end of 2018 through 2021, the deployment landscape was certainly, way less than it was 10 years before. And the Ranger Regiment still had a huge responsibility, primarily in Afghanistan, to go there and to do, consequential missions. And so that was a huge piece of attraction for me as well, kind of back to the point earlier of,
Mm.
being in the military, kind of going to the fullest extent that's available. None of that is to disparage any SEALs. I have, a ton of friends that are SEALs that are great people. I
Yeah.
just kind of was more attracted to the fact that, I mean, I worked with like, there are so many people I worked with that could get a probably $10 million book or movie deal tomorrow, uh, just based on the things that they've done, but they don't, because they have this
Yeah.
professional pride
Yeah.
and they really just care, I think, a lot more about the organization than they do about um, their own fame or wealth or anything else. And so that to me was just an awesome feature of that organization that I think is so hard to replicate in other contexts.
That's really cool. That's very cool. How do you think, your time in the military changed you? And I guess what were the most informative lessons during your time there?
Yeah, there's a lot of directions to go. This is a great question. And I'll try to get like the hindsight bias out of it. I think there are some answers are basically, I think, like, certainly I hope at least it made me, a better leader.
Mm.
And what does that mean? I don't know. It's a complicated kind of question. I definitely think it made me more cognizant of the downstream effects that leaders have on
Mm.
organizations. I think you're in the military, anywhere in life, you're exposed to good leadership and bad leadership. I just think like the commitment of the military requires and kind of the pain that is associated with a lot of the things you have to do amplifies good leadership. It also amplifies bad leadership. So a lot of those lessons are kind of pressed into you a lot
Mm.
more than I think if you work a day job. And it's not to minimize any stress, but it's just like there is like a physical separation and a legal separation, whereas in the military it isn't that way. And so I I think exposure to, there are leaders I think about every single day, honestly, that I worked for that just did some of the most incredible things and that walked the walk or walk the talk, whatever that phrase is. Um, I There's this this book that one of our leaders made us read called Legacy, which was about his famous rugby team, the All Blacks, the New Zealand rugby team.
Mhm.
And there's this phrase in there like "sweep the sheds," and it talks about how the All Blacks, the best rugby team in the world, the history of the world, one of the best athletic enterprises that has ever existed, their players, their superstars, multimillionaires sweep the dressing room at the end of every match that they have. And the message there is that like nobody is above, the little things. Like nobody is above doing that type of work. And we read that, and it wasn't an empty task to read it. Like the leader that made us read it, that had us read it, he took his trash out every day. Whenever he told us to be there, he was there. He was like whenever there was a hard thing to do, he was right there with you. Whatever the standards were that everybody had to keep, he would be out there, in the cold or in the rain or in the early mornings, like getting tested just like anybody else. And so that lesson to me was so valuable, and just that, like how important that is, just to have leaders that are, that sweep the sheds, right? Like that you don't have a culture of, oh, I just got to do this for a year, and then once I get to this level, like I'm good. And it's like the new people are just kind of the low on the totem pole. It is just, it's honestly, I don't think you could measure how much of an impact that has. And I'm not saying that's everyone in the military. Certainly many people not in the military do that, or sorry, many people in the military don't do that. I think it was something that I saw all the time in the Ranger Regiment, and was just so important for me there. And yeah, I'm happy to kind of pause there to see if you have any thoughts. I can obviously keep talking on military lessons.
I mean, the leadership aspect of it, we'll definitely delve into more into that. But I think, obviously from what you're saying, it sounds like there are a lot of pros and a lot of advantages that you've gained through your time in military. But I'm still wondering, what were the most difficult aspects of being in the military? I'm not talking about we'll ask more questions about the actual high risk, high stress situation. Just day to day,
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I'll answer it, and then I'll try to give it a positive spin at the end.
Yeah,
I think the answer is it's some intersection of control over kind of your life and your day to day. There are certain jobs you have where you are confined to like a certain radius around your headquarters. There are certain jobs that you have where like you may just get a phone call at some point in the weekend, and then you have to come in and deal with something, whether it's internal to the organization, like personnel concerns, or something, else. And so, and then like, kind of like, obviously sometimes you got to like go to training or to overseas for months on end that you don't necessarily get back. And so there is like a lack of control, or limited control rather, over kind of your day to day in that sense, which I think, certainly gets at you, and it makes other things hard. It makes, maintaining relationships hard, and things like that. Not impossible. It's just, it's an obstacle that you got to work through. And I think another answer that a lot of people would say, and that I would concur with to a degree, but this is where I'll give it the positive spin, is just like the physical or emotional hardship that comes with it. Obviously, like a lot of the stuff you got to do is not, is not painless. And I do think one of the lessons that the military taught me in that, and this is a lesson that's like much more fun to have learned than to be in the process of learning, is just like changing my relationship with hardship, in the sense that, and this is I think something I try to like communicate to peers at school, because I think it's a really important lesson. And it's that like discomfort and hardship it obviously like doesn't feel good, right? In the moment. That doesn't necessarily mean that it is a bad thing, right? Like there certainly are areas of discomfort. There are areas of hardship that are not good, that we shouldn't do, right? There are toxic aspects of the world that we shouldn't expose ourselves to. I just don't think that covers all of hardship. I think like on the other side or kind of between you and a lot of great things is a sense of discomfort, and is experiences of hardship. And so it's just a complex state, the state of hardship. And I have learned to, probably seek it out a lot more than I did before the military, and appreciate it a lot more than I did before the military. And so the reason I'm putting this in here now is because while that could be an aspect that's like, oh yeah, this sucks because I got to like go out in the cold and carry this heavy thing or whatever. it does lead to productive things. And so it's really complexified, my relationship with hardship. And I think that's a valuable lesson to hold with me now that, I'm no longer in the military, and it's not forced upon me as it used to be.
Fair. That's a very interesting, perspective. Going back to my previous point, you mentioned before that you've been deployed to Afghanistan. So I'm guessing you were in high stress and high danger situations before. How does that change your perspective on life and on your goals and just the way you see, things?
Yeah, I will, crucially say up front that like whatever my experience is peanuts compared to, thousands of others. And so nothing that, I wouldn't consider myself a subject matter expert here at all. And I do think that's important to say because it probably gets to my earlier point about why I like the unit that I was in.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do think just generally speaking, like being in stressful, I can just talk about like the stressful situation. I think I've totally screwed up a million things under stress and like done, just made like terrible mistakes and, many times. And so I think a tool that I try to like take from that is like planning before anything, especially before stressful things, is really important. Even if your plan sucks and it never ends up like even if you plan for something and you do 0% of it, I still think the act of planning is helpful because it forces you to think through things. And one really valuable thing to think through is like, what's your minimum threshold required for action, right? I think a lot of times in like high tempo situations or high stakes situations, you do have to be decisive. It's really hard to balance needing to be decisive with not being like rash or over the top or just like frantic. And so that's a balance that, I don't get perfectly for sure. And a way that I try to balance it is to think about like, okay, in order to make decision X, Y, or Z, like what actual information do I need? What's like kind of what's the level of fidelity or the level of confidence, the level of detail that I require to make this decision? And as soon as I get that, I go. It's kind of like trying to take the thinking about thinking out of it, right? You're like, okay, and in the military, it's called like a decision point. And this is something that they teach. It's like, okay, like at this place or at this juncture, at this time, if A, B, and C are true, then you go route D. But if one of those three is not true, or if like E, F, and G is true, then you go route H, I think. I don't know. Yeah, whatever is after H. I got to do that off my head. But like, does that make sense? Like, so I think like that to me is a helpful way of trying to like break it down and ensure that like you're able to act when you've already thought it's appropriate, as opposed to like making the decision when you're under stress and you're not thinking clearly. But yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. Essentially coming up with different algorithms for one scenario and just going along with it, right? Do you get better at it through trial and error, or is it like, do you get taught how to be good at it in military?
I think there's a teaching aspect to it that is helpful. And I also think it's one of those things that you got to learn by failing, right? Like you just, it's just like, all right, like put yourself in a high stress situation and choose something and then see how it went and hope, and we get to, I think we'll probably talk about failing later, but there's kind of like an art to it. And I think that's another thing the military does extremely well, is kind of sets you up to fail in safe environments, i.e. training, so that you're kind of cleaning the failures out of you, so to speak.
I see.
So I think to answer your question, it's a lot of training with a little bit of like, direction setting up front.
Got it. Andrew, you obviously from the limited information available to me, I've seen that you, even in military, you had the leadership positions. You were chief of staff, I believe, to platoon, or is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's called like an executive officer. I think the civilian equivalent would be a chief of staff.
Yeah.
To kind of like an 80-person unit.
and you held leadership positions in college too, I believe. So, I guess my question is, and obviously it's a very personal, answer. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious about your opinion. Do you think leaders are born or are they made? And was it like from your experience, from your background, do you think it was always in your nature, or did you just grow into being an effective leader? And what actually being a good leader means to you? Because obviously there are different definitions for it, right?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I certainly I don't have a scientific answer. I think I'll spare you the rabbit hole about whether or not free will exists, which maybe you have thoughts on. But I would say it's probably, and maybe this is a non-answer, but that's what law school sometimes teaches you. It's probably a combination of both. I although I do think for the vast majority of people, and again, this is just subjective and probably not, falsifiable, but I do think for the vast majority of people, leadership is attainable through some sort of trial or effort. And I think what is really helpful is just like what at least for me, like changed my relationship with a desire to be a leader was honestly like comfort in failing. I think I actually learned that in college, or actually, no, I learned it way before college. I probably learned it in like maybe even way before high school. But like I wrestled in high school. I wasn't like the best wrestler, and I got beat a lot. And like the kid I practiced with like every day for 2 years, he like kicked my ass like pretty much every day. And like he was bigger than me and he was better than me. And so I really just got like beat up physically a lot. And then like in the meets, like when you lose in wrestling, it not only sucks to lose, it's kind of humiliating because you get like, it's not just like, oh, that person like has better hand-eye than you. It's like, no, that person like physically dominated you and is the same weight. So there's no, there's no, so anyway, so like maybe it was just through failing in that very, in the grand scheme of things, very inconsequential environment, I kind of figured out, I was like, okay, like failing is not actually like bad. In fact, I think it's actually good if you do it in the right context because it allows you to learn and it allows you to grow. Like really without failing, it's harder to grow. And so I think like leaders can't be apprehensive of failing because you have to make like hard decisions. And like failing can mean different things in different contexts. I think in college, failing could just mean like doing the unpopular thing that like, that people just don't like, and then your friends are pissed at you, and then you got to deal with whatever that creates. In the military, failing is obviously way different. There's like real life consequences. There's pain and suffering, and sometimes money gets involved, or people's lives are really deeply impacted by failing. But what I've seen, I think, is like an apprehension to fail. Like fear of failure is itself, in my mind, like a failure for leaders. And so, anyway, like I guess relating this back to the question you asked, like, are leaders born or made? I think to like first figure out if someone is a born leader, you have to be like, well, am I willing to fail? Because you'll never know if you're not. And then maybe someone could say, well, if you're not willing to fail, you're not a born leader. Well, and then we could talk about that for 3 hours. But I really do think like, and even failure could be like in running for a leadership position, in trying out for the Ranger Regiment, in like trying to be whatever elected position in your student group in college. Like you might run for the election and not get it. And that sucks. Like it's humiliating. It hurts your self-esteem. And then like 2 days later, it's gone and no one cares and you grow up and life moves on. And so the ability to like put yourself in leadership positions, I think requires a comfort with being denied that position once you make yourself available for it. And then once you're in the position, I think if you're not willing to fail, it's going to be harder to learn. And then if you're not willing to fail, you're probably not actually like framing the decision in the best context for the people that you're leading. And so, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. And I guess what being a good leader means to you. And another question I have from what you said, you've been in environments that full of a very successful man with, I'm sure with some level of pride and egos, right? So how do you gain and maintain respect of your peers in such environments?
Yeah, it's a great question. A good leader, to boil it down, I think good leaders influence people in a beneficial direction.
Mm,
Beneficial could mean for the mission you're after, for the people of the organization,
mm,
for other stakeholders, hopefully all those things. And in order to influence people, I think you really do have to understand the people, and you have to understand the job that you're set out to do. And that to me is universal in leadership. Like, I don't think that changes if you're a student organization leader or a military leader or a high school wrestler who gets his ass kicked every day. Like, if you want to like have someone sustainably follow your guidance, I think you have to first understand them and then understand what the rest of the context is, and then just artfully like figure out how you can influence them. Listening and soliciting feedback couldn't be more helpful, really. Um, and so yeah, so like I think just in that's the short of it. And then you asked
how do you
how to
motivate
gain
people?
and maintain the respect of your peers. Yeah, so this is a bit this was a thing that I think is very true of like young military officers, because you show up to an organization that is comprised of people sometimes twice your age.
Mhm.
You've never deployed, you never done anything really important. No one cares what you to call. No one cares about your college anything.
Mm,
Uh, and some of them have deployed 10, 15, 20 times. And like any idea you come up with, they've seen 30 times before. And so it's difficult to balance. Like, you have this like rank that technically like puts you above many of them, but then in the grit, in like in terms of like actually being able to influence people sustainably, you're not on the first day above any of them. And so the people that I've seen that have been successful kind of striking that balance have been ones that are able to just relate to people on a human level and understand them and trust them and fight for them and just be like, hey, like, I know I'm the lieutenant or whatever, but you know way better than me. So like, what is your recommendation? What do you think? And then don't just ask, like, do it. And like, even if it's not gonna, even if in your mind you're like, I don't think this is gonna work, if you can do that in a way that doesn't hurt anybody or is not consequential, like, just actually demonstrate the trust by doing what they say and soliciting their feedback and just trying to be like really humble about how you ask questions, instead of telling someone that's been in the military for 18 years, that's planned 2,000 routes in his life, hey, like, why aren't we going this way? You could be like, listen, I know you thought about this. I actually think this is a great route that you chose. And like, I'm sure you're thinking about stuff I'm not. I was just wondering, like, there's this kind of like really good cover over here. Like, what is your thought process on like going this way instead? And just like even the framing of it, like, invites people in. Um, and so those are kind of all the interpersonal things. And then back to what I said earlier, I think at the beginning of this about like sweeping the sheds, you can't be holier than thou. You have to like sweat with them. You have to. You like in the morning when everyone's working out and getting after it, like, you have to be right next to them, getting after it with them, hopefully, with a little bit more weight on your
mm,
barbell than them, because they'll be looking. And when there's like an annoying, a brutal thing to do, like, oh, you got to go to this field and like pick up all this like ammunition, like, you should, if you can be obviously you should be out there with them. And that's a tension, because as a leader, like, you do have to do things at kind of a high level and like plan and direction set and stuff like that. And it does help to kind of be at that level of just like getting down, understanding what like the person at the edge is doing every day and getting their hands dirty. And so like striking that balance is really hard. And there's probably no perfect answer, but the people that I've seen do it well certainly get down and get dirty. And I would say, if anything, it's way more common to see the person that refrains from getting dirty too much than the other way around. Like, very rarely do you see a leader who's just like too busy doing like the grunt work and not doing their job. Much more often, it's like they're kind of stuck in their comfortable office, removed from the people. And so, anyway, that was kind of a little bit of a rapid fire. And maybe what that shows me in observing my own answer is that it's a ton of different things.
mm,
There is no set formula. And the people that I've seen do it well, I think really understand people, empathize with them, and care about getting them involved, and then don't think that their rank or position title puts them above doing like hard things.
I see.
It's crazy. It's like if people like you, they're willing to do a lot more for you. You know, it's sometimes that simple. Like the minute you lose people's trust or you lose their support, your job as a leader becomes exponentially more difficult.
Andrew, very interesting points, and I feel like I'm learning just by listening to you. We already spent a lot of time on this, but I still want to ask one final question before moving on to other parts.
Yeah.
You've experienced various leadership styles. You know, you're in the military, you were in college, you're in Harvard Law School right now and doing an MBA there as well. And also you started your own startup, right? How do you adapt your leadership approach based on the environment you're in? And another question I have from what you said previously, you said leaders got to know how to fail, right? Like they need to be confident. Yeah. How do you continue to maintain the respect and the trust if you fail in front of your, people who you are in charge of?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'll answer it sequentially. So the first question is adapting leadership styles to different environments. It's something I think about a lot and I struggle with because obviously in the military, you got some pretty thick-skinned people that like you can scream at and they will probably respond well. Like you could go up to someone and be like, scream at them, say stuff you probably can't say in a podcast. And then like the next minute they're just like working harder. And like, not everybody, of course, but like, there are some very thick-skinned people in the military that, nothing against others. It's just not as common that you see it elsewhere. And the customs of like law school are not the same. And so you do have to adapt your style. I think what's prior to all that though, is kind of what I mentioned earlier in just understanding people. And so while the manifestation of your leadership will be different in different contexts, I think the process of determining how are you going to influence people should be the same, more or less. Obviously, in like, if you have like no time to act, then you just like, sometimes you just got to be like, hey, this is what we're doing. If you disagree, let's talk after. We don't have time right now and we're going. But in the majority of cases, when you have the luxury of time, I think it becomes a thing of understanding people, getting to know them as humans, their families, their situations, etc., bringing in their feedback, listening to their feedback and giving them meaningful responsibility in it. So they are part of the team. And then just artfully being like, okay, like, I think this person responds really well to humor. Like, let's do it. Or this person like maybe doesn't love this direct feedback. So every time I give them feedback, I'm going to lead with like something they're doing great or something like that. It's just really, I think like the more you get to know somebody, the better you will be at understanding kind of how they respond. And this is something that, anybody who has friends is capable of because it's something that we do with our friends every day. And of course it manifests differently in leadership because at the end of the day, you have to give direction and make decisions. But really like behind all of that is just understanding people and being like, okay, what do we do? Like, how do I think? What's my best guess at their, ability to respond? And so, so obviously it's depending on the source of people, the results will be different. And then failing as a leader, like I really think the biggest thing, and this is something that took me forever to learn, and I'm still learning, to be honest. Like it's often very hard for me to admit failure, and I know that's something I have to work on. I think like it's crazy, like when someone fails and they just say like, yeah, I totally screwed that up. No one's like, oh, I hate this guy. Like it's kind of like all the animosity like washes away. It's that point of vulnerability to be like, yeah, I think I screwed this up. And like, there have been times when I've worked for people that like, we're doing something and it's going really poorly and everybody knows it. It's painful. It's honestly almost embarrassing to just like be before that, right? Like by proxy, it's embarrassing. And so when the leaders come out of that and just try to justify, be like, oh, like, person over there didn't do the right thing, or person over there, like it only digs their hole deeper. But like sometimes when people are listen guys, like I screwed that up. Like I thought this was the case, so I did this and it was totally wrong. I either made the wrong decision or I misunderstood, whatever it was. They just diagnose their failure and they're like, listen, like I'm going to like do better next time. And as long as you like do actually try to do better and like make a concerted effort, that decreases the temperature on failure a ton. And so I really think like failures are inevitable, and being able to fail and just like take responsibility for it, even if you don't think it's your fault, goes a really, really long way to gaining respect. And then and then the last point I'll have on this is like, it kind of relates to my earlier point of bringing people into the fold. Like if you bring everybody in and say, hey, like I got my like, you know, I got my like team leaders with me and there's like the 5 of us, we're talking, how do we make this plan? If the 5 of you make a plan and it doesn't work out, there's going to be much less like, oh, XYZ is wrong than like if you just kind of ignore them and say, no, I know better than you. And then you do it and then you're wrong. You're kind of caught with your pants down there. And so I think like a hedge against the like influential repercussions of failure could be just bringing people on board. And I would posit that you'd probably fail less in doing so anyway. So it's kind of a win-win.
Andrew, time is flying, but I almost I can listen to you for hours. I'm being very honest. And I think what you mentioned, I read it, I think, in the book by Jocko Willing, which I think it's called Extreme Ownership, essentially owning up fully and, you know, like your mistakes, even if it's not due to you, kind of like as a leader, you should take responsibility for it. And yeah, very interesting points. I guess coming back to what you're doing right now, you're at Harvard pursuing JD MBA, law degree and MBA at the same time. Why those degrees and why at the same time, and you know why a joint degree?
Yeah, I think really, and there's a couple of reasons for the JD MBA. I would upfront frame it as I'm much more business oriented, I think, than legally oriented, and so that obviously explains my startup, which we can talk about. The main reason I wanted to add the JD on was because I'm very interested in the intersection of entrepreneurship as well as law, policy, and kind of social impact. And I really do think like to try to create a sustainable, positive impact on the country, it really, really helps to understand the law and understand how people think about the law. Even if you're not going to become a lawyer. And so I think it's been very helpful for my current efforts. Like right now I work with a lot of lawyers. And I also work in just like a heavily regulated space of like substance use disorder, and just kind of even just go like, of course I'm no legal expert at all. And any lawyer will know way better than me. But I do think just like having that baseline exposure has been super helpful for understanding how to make an impact. And then I think later in life, I do have ambitions of like, you know, staying in kind of in like policy impact spaces. And really at the end of the day, like a lot of policy, I mean, not all policy, but a lot of policy is just law. And so if you want to make policy, it helps to know the law or understand at least how courts read the law or think about the law or interpret the Constitution, because a lot of policies get really hamstrung by the law, and that's the design of our government, and for good or for bad, that is how we've intended it to be. And so that's like the main reason. Because and then I would also just make one more plug on the JD for non-lawyers. I would say the law school has taught me how to think in a profoundly different way than I thought before. I think fundamentally what law school does is it gives you a very complex set of facts, right, in a case, but also juxtaposed to like precedent and law and what the Constitution says. And so there's like this massive jumble of chaos, like both in terms of what you're looking at, but also like how similar is it to like what the court has said in the past and what else is going on. And it's like very complicated, and there isn't always like a blueprint for it. And what you do in law school is you analyze that complexity and you determine like, what is the question I need to answer first? And then the question I need to answer second. And then within that question, what are the sub questions? And so like the mapping out of basically like you're charting risk there, essentially. It's like, what do I need to know to proceed? And if yes, then I go this way. And if no, then I have to ask 3 more questions or something. And like law school, I think implicitly or indirectly teaches you dynamics really well. I think because like a lot of these decisions, like say there are 5 questions you have to answer, the order in which you answer them is more important sometimes than what you even have to answer. And so that has like fundamentally changed the way I just think about things and analyze things. And of course, that isn't a discipline that's exclusive to law school. Like law school does not have a monopoly on this. It's still a great, I think, way to expose yourself to that. And so I that is not the entire reason I'm at law school. I think, of course, that isn't it, but it was a huge bonus, and it's been something that I would advocate for people to just kind of open their mind to a little bit. That maybe considering law school or not even considering it.
I see. And so you already mentioned, you said you're more business oriented. You started your own startup, which we'll talk about very soon.
Yeah.
What do you find appealing about entrepreneurship, and also like, are there any parallels between running a team in startup and running a team in military?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like if you were to map on a spectrum, like highly corporate, highly bureaucratic, to like the opposite, which is what I'm doing now, which is like a startup of like basically just me and a couple others with zero structure. Like the trade-off is in a startup, you have effectively no guidance, no guardrails.
Mm-hmm.
No one is there to pick you up if you fall down except for yourself and whoever else is on your team.
Mm-hmm.
And the flip side of it is that your upside is basically like unlimited or hopefully unlimited.
Yeah.
And so I think especially when I think about like making a positive impact on the world, I really think entrepreneurship is one of the best ways and probably one of the most underrated ways in doing it. I don't know how blown it is. Behind me, you'll see a couple of books that I'll plug, and my friends will make fun of me for plugging them because I'm a bit of a broken record. But there's a book called Doing Good Better by Will McCaskill that basically talks about effective altruism and how to create a positive impact on the world that is exponentially higher than kind of what the average person might do. And it's not as hard as you think, actually. And so anyway, like something that he talks about is entrepreneurship, and it comes down to this like marginal value question. And it's like, if you're going to go start a company, like the marginal value of that company is probably very high because most likely know what you're like. In order to sustain yourself as a startup, you're solving a problem that isn't being solved at all, or at least not to the extent that you're solving it.
Yeah.
And so without going down a rabbit hole, I actually think it's changed my mind how I think of for-profit companies, because in order to sustain yourself as a for-profit company, there is a much higher correlation with value creation and value capture than there is in a nonprofit that's much more correlated with just raising funds. Now, that is not a one-to-one thing. Like I totally acknowledge there are many companies that are extremely not great for society. And just because you're for-profit doesn't mean you're doing a pro-social thing. But I do think if you have a social impact goal and a for-profit structure and a lot of other things need to happen, there are ways to make that extremely altruistic because the marginal value of that is very high. Because if you don't start that company, what are the odds someone else that we don't know? But like if you don't go take the job at Goldman or at a consulting firm, there's a huge pipeline of people that want to take that job. Yeah. And so if you think about like what impact do you as a human, do you as an individual want to have on the world? So I think startups are profoundly high. Again, it's so individualized. Like it that relies on like the fact that you want to do it. I'm not saying everybody should now go start a company. Yeah. Of course, it has to be something that appeals to you. But I think if it does appeal to you, you should really like give that consideration a lot of weight. And so it does appeal to me, I think, for the reasons I was getting at before, which really are just like you have a lot more ownership and the reward, it's like high highs and low lows. And the military was like that too. Like you have high highs and you have low lows. And maybe I'm just used to it, or maybe I actually do like it. I don't know. But that's the path I've consistently chosen in my life ever since I decided to wrestle in high school. Yeah. I was like, oh, the high highs and low lows are, I guess, the way this is the rest of my life. I don't know. Nothing I can do about it. Yeah. And so like, that's the startup. It's like today, for instance, like I made a ton of phone calls, trying to pitch my startup and get partners, customers, support, and like 95% of people just, mostly politely, but said like, listen, no. And it's hard. Like, it's not fun. Like, you shouldn't, no one should tell you otherwise. On the flip side of that though, is like when the one person does say yes, you're like, oh, this is incredible. Like, this is great. Like, let's go. And then you fire up the emails to set up the thing, and then you keep going. And so if that's something that just appeals to me. And so I think coupling the high highs, low lows, the massive fulfillment, the massive ownership, with the fact that I do really truly believe it's like an altruistic path, has made it something that is very attractive to me. Knowing that, I guess, like the odds say that, most startups don't succeed. So I guess
hopefully yours will succeed. And I think what you're trying to do is actually very, very good thing. You're not just pursuing one of those very common ideas, or, you're not jumping into like sustainability or AI because it's trendy now, right? You're doing something you're actually passionate about. And hopefully your company will succeed. Both in military and in entrepreneurial world, the as you mentioned several times, the failure is really high. There are a lot of risks involved. How do you deal with that? How do you stay motivated? How do you like maintain your composure? How do you like just push through those things?
Yeah, I think framing is so important, and framing not only like the failure, but also framing like why you're doing it. And so, like I said, like I get rejected every day. I spend a lot of my time doing very not the most sexy things. Then I'm like, oh, there are definitely times where it can get to me. And I really, like, what I've been calling it lately is I'm just getting like mud on my jersey. Like, I would never want to I don't want to play a game where I don't get mud on my jersey. And so, and that's like a stupid framing, but it kind of like help. It kind of is just like, okay, like I'm just getting dirty. Like, it's fine. And really reminding myself like why I'm doing it and what the like potential for it is keeps me going. And I guess just like I do take pride in the fact that like it's hard and a lot of people don't do it. And I do that does attract me to it. And so it's kind of like if I take pride in that, it's not like then the hard times are a benefit, right? Like, it's kind of this thing I discovered during I just had this epiphany once in this pretty hard training exercise I did in the Army, where I had a really honestly like a bad attitude at first. And I almost like failed out. I got very close to failing out, and it wasn't good. And then all of a sudden I just had a mindset switch, and then like things went extremely well for me afterwards. And really it was just like taking like enjoying like the hard moments, because that's like why you're there. It's like, I didn't join the military. I don't want to do these hard jobs in the military to like be comfortable. And like, it's fine if people want to be, I'm not saying everyone should want this, but it's like, if you know the end state that you're after is something that is difficult, and that is like part of what attracts you to it, then the difficult times in the intermediate period are good. Like, that is what you signed up for. And that is what's making you grow to the ultimate end. And so in that context, it was like becoming tougher to be a leader in tough times. Now it's like, okay, I am I'm trying to build a platform that doesn't really exist right now. And if no one ever told me they didn't want it, or like no one ever gave me pushback on it, that in and of itself would be a massive red flag, because I would probably not be asking the right questions, and I probably wouldn't be pushing myself enough. So I try to really frame it that way and say like, okay, like this might suck in the moment, but it is a signal that like something's going wrong now. And I won't go too deep in this. Now, the challenge is to balance that with not going too far, and not just like berating people, or not being so stubborn with eventually people telling you like you may need to listen and like adjust what you're doing. And so that's a really hard dance to do, but certainly no failures and no hardship and no pushback is wrong. And then at some point, too much is also probably wrong. And so getting somewhere in the middle is where you need to be. But like, if you're not experiencing any hardship, not experiencing any failure, you should be very confident that
You're right.
there's some hidden risk
Yeah.
involved, and a blow up is going to come when you don't want it to.
Very quickly, I want to ask you before moving on to your Laptis, your startup.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate between constructive criticism and like it's some feedback that just really is trying to like, kind of, I don't know what's the right word, not degrade, but essentially just, like put you down in some way?
Yeah, this is an incredible question. And it is really, I think, like, it is something I'm not a master of. If someone is a master of it, I would love to meet them, because it's really a fundamental challenge of startup is like, you get rejected all the time, you fail a lot. And like, at what point is failure just part of the journey versus a signal that you should pivot?
Yeah.
And kind of both can be true, right? Like part of the journey is pivoting. And so I think it comes down to like really having to protect your vision. Like you should know like what principally you're trying to do, what impact you're trying to have, or what ethics or morals you stand for, and really trying to be like firm on those. But the path you take to get there should be something you're willing to kind of adjust based on what else is going on. And so how do I differentiate? I guess, and it's in the moment, it's never this rigorous. I just kind of react.
Yeah.
But I guess thinking about it, it's probably a balance of like, okay, is what they're saying like genuinely trying to like, are their incentives aligned with mine? If their incentives are not aligned with mine, I think there's your first red flag. Second, it's like, is what they're saying like something I can quickly test in an agile way that would be consistent with my vision? If so, then it's probably worth it. If not, then you have more questions to ask yourself. And then I think also it's like patterns, right? Like maybe you set something up where depending on what situation you're in, like, all right, the first suggestion I get, I'm never going to react to. But if I hear it multiple times, then maybe that's a signal. So there's other kind of ways you could measure it. And so I think my method is probably a combination of three or all of those, and sometimes none of them. And something that this other book right here, this is the other book I'm going to plug, Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, which I think is just the foundational book in my life, like maybe the most important book I've ever read. It talks about how you can like build systems that get better from disorder, like not just stay the same, but actually like every time there is a disorder, every time there is a setback, you get better from it. And so I think what's important when getting any sort of feedback or testing anything out is to make sure that it's like falsifiable, meaning you can know if it's wrong, and you can know if it's wrong quickly, and you can know if it's wrong in as less harmful of a situation as possible. And so an example of that with like the startup could be, okay, I'm going to, and I haven't done this, but like, well, I probably shouldn't talk about the startup because there's clients that we're doing, but like say you're starting a company that is like, you're building like an AI tool for negotiation. And you're like, okay, I have this hypothesis that, these lawyers need AI tools for negotiation because they negotiate all the times. And I've done this research that says like they're leaving 15% value on the table, something like that. Assume you have this hypothesis. And then you go to a bunch of lawyers and you say, all right, and like this will seem basic to people, but you say, all right, like I have this idea, you convince them to do it, to participate in it. Like you structure an experiment, probably not versus a lawyer, probably in like a canned scenario at first, where you know what the actual like value maximization is, and then like what value they can have on the table. So you can falsify your hypothesis of like the 15%. If you were to just do it in like a lawyer on lawyer thing that makes it harder to measure, then maybe there is like, maybe you're not actually rigorously getting at like, is your 15% threshold being met? And so while you can have a lot of customer satisfaction and a lot of sexiness to the tool, that like say that 50% number is somehow tied to your monetization strategy or your value proposition, you want to test that as quickly as possible. And so maybe like creating, like having like an experiment, right? Where the person on the other end is told to respond in certain ways. And then of course, broadening it and testing it out in multiple ways. But the worst thing you could do is just like avoid trying to falsify that number and then proceeding on and then learning that it's false when you're at scale and there's a lot more consequences. It's kind of like the scientific method, right? Like you conjecture something and then you try rigorously to disprove it.
A null hypothesis, essentially.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm thinking of like better examples than what I just gave, but we
Yeah.
should keep moving because yeah.
Yeah. You say so many interesting things. I wish this conversation was like 2 hours, 3 hours long. Tell us about your company, Laptis.
Yeah.
What's your mission, vision when it comes to it, and what are the milestones and goals you're aiming to achieve?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so Laptis is a company. We're building a platform to streamline access to substance use treatment, to effective substance use treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, we're targeting lawyers, physicians, and social workers to connect their clients with treatment in a much more kind of informed and streamlined way. What we've discovered is that the substance use treatment landscape can be somewhat opaque and difficult to navigate and just unclear for someone that's looking for treatment. And the kind of frontline treatment advocates, which are your lawyers, social workers, doctors, sometimes spend hours and days looking for treatment, basically making a bunch of phone calls, doing a bunch of Google searches, getting put on hold. And it means clients are usually sometimes not even getting to treatment because they can't find it. If they are going to treatment, oftentimes they get thrown in kind of the first available bed. And then there's a massive opportunity cost for these professionals who are trained professionals and are spending their time kind of on hold and could otherwise be doing legal work or treating patients or stuff like that. And so the idea is to build an end-to-end platform to streamline the that landscape and give clients an informed choice on where to go and free up time for professionals. I think also there's a huge benefit here to treatment centers, and we're not, the treatment centers that we've talked to and that we're beginning to work with, I think are very interested in, attaining the right clients, because there's a huge matching process that goes on, and like everybody has a preference, and like the more matching we can create, the more optimal the system will be. And so I think the value proposition in this is for the treatment centers is that it gives them, access and reach to a huge density of clients and a very diverse, group of clients that all are very worthy of treatment. And, treatment centers can now, become matched with clients that are better fit for their needs in a much more efficient way than I think some are having to do right now. And so so that's kind of the vision and the value proposition. Currently we're running pilot tests on the platform now with a couple different entities, and it's been going pretty well. Like we're finding that we can save time and we can actually make new connections to treatment. And we're able to, I think, really like meet treatment center demand for the centers that really all they want to do is treat people and fill beds and just like help people out. And so I think we're able to kind of service all of the stakeholders and the clients, especially because now, there's just a higher matching of treatment and a better matching of treatment. And so hopefully everybody wins is the idea. And that's what we're seeing so far. And so, if anyone that's listening to this or watching this is involved in kind of any one of those three stakeholders, the demand side, supply side, or the client, we'd love to talk. We'd love to work with you. And yeah, like this is something that's been going well so far, in spite of all the rejections and the failures that I've talked about, and yeah, I truly fundamentally believe in it. And so I think milestones coming up, without getting too into the weeds, we're at a couple different pilot participants right now. We actually just added another one right before this call, and there's a couple big customers, so to speak, big institutions that we feel very close to getting, that we're hopefully going to be able to partner with, sometime hopefully before the summer, but if not, hopefully during the summer, so that we can then kind of fix this cold start problem and get enough people on all sides of the platform to start creating that flywheel.
Andrew, I know we're running out of time and you have to go. I had such a pleasure just listening to you, learning from you. And again, I wish we had more time so I could ask more questions, because I feel like you're full of wisdom. But any final words to our viewers? Any advice, any words of wisdom?
I don't know. I mean, like part of me feels like I don't know if I should be giving words of wisdom to anyone but myself because I certainly need it. But just like a couple points that I mentioned throughout, I really think like things that have helped me out are just like learning to be okay with failure and to frame it and try to frame it in a positive way. Learning to be okay with discomfort because it is a catalyst for growth.
Mhm.
And yeah, like sweep the sheds. I mean, that's not a proprietary idea. That's
Yeah,
that's from the book. The book is Legacy.
legacy.
So
Yeah.
don't get me for any copyright. But really, like those are three things that I think would go a long way. And I guess my fourth is just like listen to people. And I
Mhm.
know we didn't talk about any of that stuff as much, but like I really do think um, something that I've been exposed to in the military is people from a lot of different backgrounds
Mhm.
and of very hard parts of the world and
Mhm.
grown up with a lot less luck than I did. And I feel
Mhm.
extremely lucky to be born where I was born and be just given gifts that I didn't earn. I just was born with.
Mhm.
And the test that I try to play on myself is like when I think about someone who's I disagree with, I say, okay, if I were born in their shoes, would I think what they think? And if the answer is yes, which I think usually it is, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm not, it's not a whole or nothing. Usually the answer is yes. I try to empathize with them, and even if I like don't like their point of view at all, and even if it like viscerally affects me,
Mhm.
I try to say like, okay, I would probably be that person or be thinking the same thing that person thinks if I were in their shoes. Now that isn't like forgive certain thought. Like that's not to say that like every thought ever is okay.
Yeah.
It's just meant to empathize with the individual that holds the thought, as opposed to like without necessarily endorsing the thought itself. I think that is a thing that has allowed me to build friendships and relationships across so many different boundaries that I'm so thankful for, and it's something that I really wish I saw more of at school. And I would just encourage people to do that. Like that actually maybe is my main parting thought is just ask yourself if you were that person, would you think what they think? Probably the answer is yes, or at least somewhat yes.
Yeah.
And if so, the response to that should just be empathy for the thought. And they're probably going through pain and suffering if it's a hard thing to think. And then you can, starting from that place, just makes, I think, every problem a bit more tractable. We're not going to solve everything, of course, but I think at least that sets us up to be in a better position to understand and make progress. So, yeah, I
Hey,
appreciate you having me on. This was great.
thank you so much for your time, and
Yeah.
hopefully we can stay in touch. And good luck with your
Yeah.
startup, with everything else you do.
Yeah, would love to. Thanks so much. This was great. I appreciate it. Have a great rest of
Have
your
a
day.
fantastic day. Bye bye.